If you travel to Japan, you can board the Shinkansen and travel safely and smoothly at over 200 miles per hour. In China, the government has laid down over 26,000 miles of new high-speed passenger rail in just the last 15 years. Then there is the United States, where the passenger train system looks and runs like a holdover from the 1970s. The country that built its economic empire on the railroad has fallen decades behind the rest of the developed world in passenger transit. Buy a ticket from Chicago to Los Angeles, expecting a scenic 2-day journey, and you will likely spend hours of your trip parked in a random cornfield, waiting for a coal train to pass by. The immediate reason your passenger train is always late comes down to a structural flaw. Outside of the Northeast Corridor between Washington, D.C. and Boston, Amtrak actually owns very little of the physical track it drives on. Instead, Amtrak has to pay rent to a handful of massive private freight and cargo companies to use their rails. Over the last few decades, these corporate track owners adopted a highly profitable logistics strategy known as precision scheduled railroading. To cut operating costs, freight companies realized they could string together unbelievably long cargo trains. We are talking about massive walls of shipping containers stretching over 2 miles long. This creates a geometry problem. Side tracks, designed for trains to pull over, were built for normal-length trains. When a 2-mile-long freight train meets an Amtrak train, the cargo train cannot fit into the side track. The passenger train is forced off the main line to wait. Federal law dictates that passenger trains must have priority over freight, but because these private monopolies own the tracks, they routinely ignore the rule and face almost no penalties. Passengers are treated as a secondary nuisance. The physical infrastructure of the United States prioritizes Amazon packages and oil barrels over human mobility. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the United States operated the most expansive and effective passenger rail network in history. By the 1920s, private railroad companies competed fiercely to offer the fastest routes and most glamorous dining cars. Taking the train was a premium, sought-after experience. Following World War II, the U.S. government shifted its focus. They poured billions of taxpayer dollars into constructing the interstate highway system, re-engineering the American landscape around the car, and incentivizing a new era of sprawling, low-density development. Driving a car or taking a plane was suddenly heavily subsidized by the public. Private train companies, forced to pay to maintain their own physical tracks, simply couldn't compete with the artificially cheap alternatives and began going bankrupt. Facing the complete collapse of passenger rail in 1971, the government stepped in and created Amtrak as a publicly funded corporation. But they made a fatal error. They bought the trains while leaving the physical tracks in the hands of the freight industry. Amtrak was never set up to be a competitive, modern transit system. It was a panicked bailout, hobbled from day one by a flawed compromise. Defenders of the current system rely heavily on a single excuse: the United States is simply too vast, and its immense geography makes high-speed rail impossible. But that argument ignores how Americans actually live. The country is full of megaregions, dense clusters perfectly spaced for high-speed rail. We don't need a single train connecting New York to LA. We need regional networks linking the Texas Triangle, Midwest, and Southern California. Landmass is not the issue. China and the U.S. share a nearly identical geographic footprint, yet China connected their entire country with bullet trains in roughly a decade. The true barrier is a lack of political will, a refusal to challenge the freight monopolies we've empowered, and a car-centric culture that continues to prioritize sprawling land use over efficient transit. America's transit failure is a choice. We dismantled a world-class network and handed the rails over to cargo companies. The question now is whether we accept a future stuck in traffic or finally demand a system built for people.